next presenter is Yadira Resendez. Ms. Resendez is a professional engineer for the Technical Review and Oversight Team in the Plan and Technical Review section of the Water Supply Division here at TCEQ. She graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Texas A&M University, Kingsville, and attained her master's degree in Civil Engineering from the University of Texas at Austin. She has worked for the TCEQ TROT team since 2013, where she reviews exceptions to the 30 TAC Subchapter D requirements and provides technical assistance to public water system representatives. On her off time, she enjoys gardening, hiking, and camping at our state parks with her family. Please welcome Ms. Yadira Resendez.
Hi, good afternoon. First, thank you to everyone for sticking to the last presentation of the last day. Wish I could buy you all around, but they don't pay me that much, so we're just going to cook right through it. My presentation today is about alternative capacity requirements, or ACRs. James kind of briefly touched on those type of exceptions that we review, so this is a presentation that will go in a little bit more detail about what ACRs actually are and what we would need for an approval. So what is an ACR? ACR stands for Alternative Capacity Requirement, and essentially what that means is you can't meet a capacity requirement that's in the rule, or you're going to design something and it might be over-designed if it has to be by the book. So what you're actually requesting is to use a lower number than what's actually required in our rules. And I'll go through some of the capacity requirements. So as an example, let's say that you are required to meet a production capacity of 0.6 GPM per connection. The 0.6 is what's required by rule. What an ACR would do will allow you to operate at a production capacity of 0.49 GPM instead of the 0.6. As James had briefly also touched on, ACRs are only available for community systems that have ground storage. So if you're not a community system, that's okay. We can evaluate it under a different category. But by rule, these are the only systems that are allowed to have an ACR. So these are just a quick snapshot of how the capacity requirements are broken up in our rules. So we have groundwater systems, community groundwater systems under 45B1, surface water systems under B2. Non-community systems will be under 45C and D, and that's for transient and non-transient systems. We also have capacity requirements if you're a wholesale system, and that is under 45E. And if you're just a purchased water system, your capacity requirements will be under 45F. So we're just going to go through these really quickly. So a community groundwater system, and you're serving less than 50 connections, you have no ground storage, you're only a well, pump, and maybe a pressure tank, or maybe just a well and a pump, no ground storage. Then you're required to meet a well production capacity of 1.5 GPM per connection, and you also need to have a pressure tank that meets 50 gallons per connection. So what this means is if you have, say you have 20 connections and you have to meet 50 gallons per connection, the 50 times the 20, help me out here, 2,000? Did I get that right? Maybe? That's how many connections or gallons you would need of pressure tank capacity. If you serve less than 50 connections, but you do have ground storage, then you kind of level up and graduate to need to provide service pumps and storage, total storage. Your well production capacity goes down from 1.5 to 0.6 because now you're providing storage and you have water available. You're not running your pump all the time. Your total storage capacity is 200 gallons per connection. And then you can see there, you have to provide at least 2 or more pumps for service pump capacity. Both pumps together have to meet the 2.0. And then your pressure tank capacity goes down from 50 to 20 gallons per connection. And at this point, if you are a system like this, from here on out is where you qualify for an ACR. For those community groundwater systems that are serving between 50 and 250, you'll see that the majority of their requirements are the same, except when you start getting down to elevated storage. So there are just some systems that might have a standpipe, and part of that standpipe is considered elevated storage, and that's where this would come in as well. So these are the requirements for systems serving 50 to 250. And then for our community systems that are the larger systems, 250 connections, you'll see that you're required to have a little bit more for redundancy, for ensuring you have sufficient supply. So at this point, you would need to provide 2 wells, and both wells combined need to meet the 0.6. You need to have a total storage capacity of 200 gallons per connection. Your service pump capacity can either be provide 2 or more pumps, 2.0 GPM per connection, or you can have at least 1,000 GPM and can still meet peak hour demand with the largest pump out of service. So that's like an and/or. Pressure tanks, 20 gallons per connection. But as James mentioned also, once you hit 2,500 connections, you need to start putting in elevated storage, and that's what the rule requires. You're only allowed to have up to 30,000 gallons of pressure tank capacity for up to 2,500 people, and you can't meet the capacity requirements with that. You need to start going into elevated storage. And one of the ACRs I'll talk about is when you can't put in elevated storage, but let's say you want to increase your pressure tank capacity. And that's one of the ACRs that we do review. I'll go that into more detail. Groundwater systems, guess what? If you are a mobile home park or an apartment, you have your own regulation, your own capacities. Your well production is going to be greater. If you're classified as a mobile home park or an apartment, you have to provide a 1 GPM per connection. And you have to provide pressure tank capacity, 50 gallons per connection. Typically, these systems, if they don't have ground storage, less than 100 connections, you can get through with this. Well, once you put in storage, or you begin serving more than 100 people, then you start getting more capacity requirements. Your well capacity requirement will require you to keep at the 0.6, but if you have more than 250 connections, you have to have an emergency interconnect. Your total storage requirement goes up to 200, then you have service pumps put in, and then you have your pressure tank capacity put in. So these are what's required if you operate a mobile home park or an apartment and you're serving less than 100 connections with no storage, or you're already serving 100 connections. Now, if you're wondering what a connection means for an apartment, every single living unit is considered a connection. So if an apartment building or apartment complex serves 300 living units, they have 300 apartments available for rent, that is 300 connections. And this is when some public water systems end up finding out we should have been counting each of these apartments as one. So this is just something as a heads up. We're not here to get anyone in trouble, but as far as connection goes for apartments, every unit is considered one connection. And then the big kahuna, the surface water plants. These guys have a lot. They have a raw water pump capacity they have to meet, a plant capacity, transfer pump capacity, clear well storage capacity, and this is just before you even hit the entry point. This is just at the plant. And then we start looking at distribution capacities that you're required to have, total storage, service pump capacity, and then elevate it once you hit the 2,500 connections in your system. So essentially, for the most part, ACRs that are requested, say for a surface water plant, for plant capacity, we would need to also evaluate the ACR for raw water pump capacity. If we were to grant one ACR for one and not the other, odds are you might get cited by the region because you can't really meet one ACR without being deficient in the other. So if there ever is an exception or an ACR that's being requested for surface water treatment plants, we would need to also consider raw water pump capacity along with plant capacity, and also considering what is production capacity. So that's a different kind of beast to throw in there. Needless to say, ACRs for surface water plants are a little more complicated, they're a little more complex, but they're achievable than we've done them before. We just might need a little different information to make sure we issue you a number that is applicable and meets the goal of the system, but can still provide public health protection and continue to meet the demands of your users and your customers. Purchased water systems, if you buy water, you are required to have a purchased water contract, and that purchased water contract has to have a maximum daily rate or hourly rate, basically something that tells us this is how much water you are obligated to receive from your wholesaler. If the typically contracts that I've seen, they will issue an annual amount. If we're lucky, there's a monthly amount. If we're really lucky, there's actually an hourly rate or a peak hour rate or a max daily rate. Regardless of how it's issued in the contract, there has to be some number for region when they go out there to ensure you're getting the amount of water that you need to meet your customers' demands. And so this is why part of that asking for a max hourly rate is to ensure that the water you're receiving can meet the peak demands of your system, which typically relies on service pump capacity under direct pressure. So mostly the purchased water capacities in 45 will focus on source, on production or capacity. Once we start talking about ground storage, pressure tanks, elevated storage, all the capacities for those other systems for your purchased water, they'll be evaluated depending on the source. So are you a surface water purchased? Are you a groundwater purchase? Are you a GUI purchase? Depending on that source, it will tell you what type of storage capacity you need to meet, whether you need to meet elevated storage capacity or pressure tank capacities. So, but for the most part, for ACRs that deal with purchased water capacities, it's because there's a contract issue or a system is stuck and we are at a take or pay, and we are paying for way too much water that our system doesn't need, but we can't reduce it because the state tells us we need a 0.6. And this is when you can come to us with usage data and we can try to grant a number that's more representative of the usage, and that way that helps alleviate some of contract negotiations, or at least having it be that you are in compliance with your existing contract because you just got an ACR. So as we had mentioned before, if you are a community system with storage, you qualify for an ACR. If you're not, you're a non-community or you're one of these tiny groundwater systems with no storage, then you can apply for a capacity exception. There's a reason why these two are different. ACRs are rule-based. Our rules specify this is what you need to provide, this is what your engineer needs to submit, this is how long the review period is, and if there's a denial, the rule says this is what we need to do. And the timeline is different. It's a rule-based 90-day review period. If you read our regulations, if you don't get a response from us, the executive commissioner, within 90 days, you are granted what you requested. So that is no budging. A 90-day review period can't budge. But under a capacity exception, we have a little more leeway, a little more flexibility on the information that we need to review. And so we might have a little more flexibility with the type of conditions we issue. So if you are in a situation where you got a violation for some capacity, you don't qualify for an ACR, you can still request to get that capacity number reduced through the exceptions process. So some of the reasons why systems request ACRs, they got cited. Guess what? You are serving way too many connections, and now your well capacity or your well production is not enough. So you'll come in and ask us to reduce your well production capacity requirement. You're a purchased water system or you're a wholesaler and there are contract negotiations, or now it's time to renew your contract, or you're getting pressure from water conservation efforts to reduce your consumption. You don't want to get in trouble with the state either. This is where you come in and we can review a request to reduce the capacity you need to provide, but it's going to be based on water usage of your system. We don't just magically come up with a number. We look at past usage data, which we'll go into a little more detail. Say you are designing a facility for a small water system and you find they don't need 200 gallons of total storage. That's too big of a tank for this system. We're gonna have water quality issues. We're gonna have turnover issues. So there may be a need to not over-design your facility or over-design a new tank that has to go in. So you wanna justify a smaller number, or you may wanna justify, hey, the tank that my engineer designed and selected, even though it's smaller than what's required, it meets the intent. It will provide sufficient storage for my system. So this is another reason why we get capacity or ACR requests. We don't want to over-design a system, and we don't want you to over-design a system either. And as we mentioned, not every PWS is the same. So it may work for some systems to have a total storage capacity of 200 connections, and it may not make sense for other systems. And then one of the more famous ones that we get, especially out in the flatlands in the Houston region, is we don't want or have room to put in an elevated tank. We're required to because we now serve 2,500 connections, but we don't have the money, we don't have the space, or we're out in flatland country and there is no way we can do this. There is a route for you to request an ACR to install pressure tanks and emergency power to essentially make up for pressurization that an elevated storage tank would provide in an emergency or a power outage. And those are a little more detailed, but these are another type of ACRs of why people will request them. It's a district down in Houston, they're expanding, they're gonna go up to 3,000 connections. There's no room for a tank, we're just gonna increase our storage capacity, pressure tank capacity. So, okay, enough about ACRs. What do we need to send you guys so that we can get one? So, as I had mentioned, what we do is we look at 3 years, your more recent usage data. Basically, we're trying to find out what is the maximum amount of water your customers used on a given day in the last 3 years. And that's the number we use to figure out a new reduced capacity for you. So and because we need to look at your usage history, we need to get your 3 years of daily usage data. If you're a small system and not required to take daily, that's okay. You will fall in that little category where you have to request an ACR. ACRs require the usage data to be daily. If you're a system that is only required to take weekly, that's okay. We have a path for you guys where we can work with you to actually get the daily data within time or within a period of time to give you a better ACR that's more representative of a max day demand. We'll need to find out an inventory of your facilities. If you're asking for an exception for well production, well, we need to know how many wells you have and how many pressure planes you have and what facilities are in pressure planes and so forth and so on. So we'll need to know just what you have in your system in place. Pressure planes. One thing about pressure planes is if your system operates on different pressure planes, odds are you will need to split up your data and your connection counts by pressure plane. It just depends what type of ACR you're requesting. And I'll get into that, actually in the next bullet there. So if a system wants to request ground storage capacity exception or ACR for one of their 5 pressure planes, our capacity rules, the way it's written in our rules is capacities are evaluated at individual pressure planes or pump stations where you can't serve water between each other. So essentially, we'll look at pressure planes independently because some of these facilities are dependent by each pressure plane. The only one that we can look at as a whole will be for production ACRs. Say you have a well field that serves, you have 5 wells, well field, and it serves, let's say 3,000 connections on 5 pressure planes. But it's the same well source, and it's the same water going to all the people at the same time in a big group. And then this is when, in that situation, since one source serves everybody, then we would consider the ACR looking at everybody together, all pressure planes. But typically, for ground storage, pressure tank, elevated storage ACRs, those that are more facility and pressure plane independent, we would need to look at usage and connection counts that are broken up by pressure plane. If that happens to be a situation, we will make sure to reach out to you and go, do you really serve 5 pressure planes and what ACR for which pressure plane? And then we find that you need to split up the data, then we'll make sure to work with you on that as well. If you do serve several pressure planes, we'll need a map that kind of shows us how many connections per pressure plane and where they're located. And then the last thing is you don't need to be an engineer to send us an ACR. Your operator, your secretary, and anybody, your operator probably knows the system more than an engineer that lives in Houston, but you can send us an ACR request. You just need to give us usage data and connection counts for the last 3 years, and then what we have here on the list. We do have a checklist on our website. And I can show you where you can find that after the presentation, but we basically have our website, our checklist on our website. Go and click it, download it, and you basically have this information ready for you. As I mentioned, the review period is 90 days, rule-based 90 days. If you're a purchased water system that is going to request an ACR, like say for production, give us a copy of your contract so that we can establish what would be the production capacity you're supplying, and we'll run that with the region just to make sure we're all using the same number. There have been some situations where there is no historic data, usage data. There was a fire, or someone left the job and they were really upset and they took everything with them. We've heard this. There is a route for a system to request an ACR, and they can use someone else's data to get lower numbers. This type of submittal is what we call a comparable site ACR. So say that you're an RV park, you want an ACR or an exception, but you don't have any data. But you know a RV park just 5 miles down the road that's a PWS and they're required to take daily, and they mimic your system. They are serving about the same number of connections, same source. There's a couple of factors there that you would need to meet for the system to be issued comparable. But there is a route. You basically use their data, and you show us and support that these two sites are comparable, and we will use their numbers to calculate an ACR for you. However, this type of submittal must be submitted by a licensed engineer. The engineer needs to put their stamp and seal saying this is a comparable site, their usage data is similar, climatic considerations are similar. We want to use their data for an ACR request. And he will need to get permission from the public water system, the comparable site, to get an ACR request. So we will look at data from both sites. We will trust, but we will verify. Are these two sites comparable? Can we use the data? So the last thing we want to do is issue an ACR and you find out that the comparable site uses more water than you do. You end up with the bigger number that you need. But it is possible for an ACR to be substantiated using someone else's data. But an engineer will need to submit that. Okay, so let's say you made it to the finish line. You got an ACR. What do you have to do now? We get this question a lot. Simple, meet the number we gave you. If we grant you an ACR for production of 0.49 and you can't meet the 0.49, odds are we're going to take that away. There are stipulations in our rules for ACRs that will mention that if you are unable to provide the capacity that we gave you, then we do have the authority to review an ACR, or region does to go, they can't meet it. What can they do now? So you have to meet the conditions of the granted ACR. You have to keep collecting daily usage data. ACRs are dependent on the max day demand, the amount of water that was used on a single day. And you can only find that out if you're taking data daily. So this is why we encourage you, keep taking your daily usage data if you're required. In the event region's not happy with you, or they think, we don't think this ACR is applicable, can you run the numbers and find out for us? You'll have the daily data ready for us to review. You have to ensure you still meet the minimum distribution pressure requirements, 35 PSI during normal operation and distribution, 20 PSI during emergencies. With a reduced production, or with a reduced pressure tank capacity, or with a reduced elevated storage, you still have to meet the pressure requirements in 46R. And we do have a little disclaimer in the rules that say this is when we can revoke your ACR, or this is when we can revise it. So ACRs can always be subject to review or revocation. And we see this a lot where a system has an ACR and it's from 2002, and regions like, is this still valid? So just make sure you keep your daily usage data on hand, because if you can tell them, hey, this ACR still applies and here's our data, should be good. This is the one ACR that's probably the hardest to get. This is where you're requesting to say, I need to put in an elevated tank and I don't want to, I can't, there's no rule, there's no room. So what ends up happening that you are requesting to use an alternate method of pressurization. What are you going to use instead of elevated storage to provide pressurization during an emergency, during a power outage? That's what we rely on elevated storage for when you have more than 2,500 people. So what are you going to do instead of that? So we do go through a very rigorous review process. A PE has to submit this type of request. They are going to have to provide modeling data. They're going to have to go and calibrate their hydraulic model and show us they did that. They might need to go and run field tests to make sure they're using a correct coefficient friction factor for their hydraulic models. It has to be submitted by a PE. This type of hydraulic analysis, even it would take me a couple years to figure out how to do that. There's also affected utilities. How many folks here now need to have an EPP? A lot of you. Everybody pretty much. But the old water code rule for the old EPP counties said that if you had an approved EPP, you can use that as in not having to put in elevated storage. We basically are looking at the same thing. We're going to be looking at hydraulic models to make sure that without elevated storage, you can still provide sufficient water under sufficient pressure under all scenarios. Let me skip this because you all know what this is. Once you hit 2,500 connections, you have to provide elevated storage. You can request to use pressure tanks and emergency power instead of elevated storage. So this is what we will need. We'll need everything we need for an ACR review. 3 years of daily data, inventory of facilities, your purchase water system, then send us a copy of your contract. And then here's the hard part, the extra part that needs to be done by a PE. You have to verify with us with hydraulic analysis that the system without elevated storage and with the emergency power and pressure tanks you're proposing to put in can still meet demand and pressure under 3 scenarios. What's called a max day scenario, an emergency power scenario, and then the third is called a time lag scenario. So these 3 modeling scenarios have to be evaluated for the system as it stands today, and also how the build out of the system. Like these facilities will be able to provide pressure and blah, blah, blah for up to 4,500 connections. So you have to model it for the ultimate system as well. Max day scenario basically means model it at a flow that's equal to your max daily demand or a 1.5 GPM per connection. Emergency power scenario is basically saying you're just running your generators and your generators are only operating certain facilities at the plant, and that's what the model should show. If your water plant has a generator that can only power 3 out of 5 pumps, then that emergency scenario has to show only 3 pumps online during the model. A time lag scenario, basically what that means is if you have a power outage and then that window of time until emergency power kicks on and everything that's supposed to be powered is up and running, that window of period where there's no power, no nothing, we need to know just how low does pressure go in your distribution system during that time. We'll need to look at it for existing and proposed connections. Hydraulic model has to be calibrated, which means usually some sort of hydrant field testing is done. And then we will need to see a pipe network. We see what the system looks like, where the water plants are. If we were to grant this exception or an ACR, usually what this looks like is, okay, the system must now provide a pressure tank capacity of 24 gallons per connection for up to 5,000 connections. That's your ACR. You don't need to put elevated storage, but you do need to meet that ACR capacity of whatever number we calculated for you. As also like what James was mentioning, you need to have an emergency response plan updated. Your EPP, if you have one, will suffice. Emergency power, you're relying on emergency power to provide water to your customers during an outage. So we need to make sure those facilities are updated and they are NFPA, I believe, standard 110 that they have to be maintained to. Keep updating your daily usage data. Keep updating your monthly connection counts in the event someone gets upset at the system. The state goes out there and they need us to look at it. Here's my email address. Here's our website. If you can't remember how to find our website, just Google TCQ trot exception or just TCQ exception and it'll take us straight to this website. All the checklists you need for an ACR are there. A lot of the checklists that James talked about for exceptions are on our website as well. But we'll stick around. I know y'all are ready to go to the watering hole. We're all thirsty, but we'll stick around for a few more minutes for questions if y'all have them. Thank you. I had a question.
There was a question from the virtual audience. In calculating highest day demand, is there any possibility of excluding a day in history that reflected a strange confluence of events?
That is one thing I did forget to mention. Yes, the max day demand, that when we look at all 3 years, we also want you to tell us, were there any days where you had unusual demands? Was there a main break? Winter Storm Uri, did you have an overflow in one of your tanks? Did someone steal your water and they were not supposed to be doing it? We've heard it before. Jack, I hear you laughing. It's happened. You need to tell us which days are not representative of your system's max day. This is not a true max day. There was an emergency. We will exclude that. We don't want to base the ACR on a number that's not realistic. So yes, please ensure to tell us, don't include the days from Winter Storm Uri. We will going nuts that day. Don't base our number off of that. Main break, construction, just let us know. But we need, we can't read minds. You got to let us know which dates you don't want us to include in the calculation.
If I'm planning a new water system, is that typically when I get to use data from other systems? Can an engineer use a similar system for
Yes.
a system that he's designing to be used now?
Yes, and that is where you can request a comparable site ACR. So for systems that have, like it's a brand new system and there's no historic data for you to provide, this is where the PE can find you a comparable site. But it's the PE sign and signature and seal that's going to hinge on finding the system that's comparable to yours, finding the system that's going to be comparable to what you propose your system to look like. So just ensure, you are going to be relying on another system's data for your calculations, but we have done it for proposed systems.
So that would include both the relationship or the ratio of commercial to residential and all that stuff,
Correct,
right?
exactly. So 45G5 will have a list of factors to consider when you are, actually, I wish I had the rules pulled up here. There are about five or six factors.
Okay.
Number of connections, socioeconomic. You don't want to compare a mobile home park to a plant, what we used to call the rich areas, a plantation, where they're irrigating the hell out of their lawns and they have pools. So you need to consider socioeconomic. Climatic conditions can also have an effect on usage. So you don't want to pick, you want to pick a location that's close to you. So in the rules, they do state these are some factors to consider when looking at a comparable site.
Thank you.
Sure.
Do ACRs expire?
No, some do. It's with the statement, it depends. Some ACRs may have a temporary expiration date or an expiration date on that. Typically, when we issue those kind of ACRs that expire, it's because we were relying on data that wasn't daily. And so for us to calculate an ACR, we basically had to do math per the rules and find what a max day would look for you. So our rules will say something like, if you want to calculate max day demand, multiply your average day demand by 2.4. So we could essentially get average daily demand data, calculate a max day, and base that ACR. Typically, that number is going to be extremely conservative and a lot higher than what you need. So we'll give you, say, 3 years. We'll say, come back in 3 years with 3 years of data. In the meantime, meet this number. And once that ACR is about to expire, you give us your 3 years of daily data, and then we will actually calculate the ACR on a actual discrete max day instead of trying to calculate it and it not being representative. So there are some that will expire. There have been some that we've issued for, you have to demolish an elevated storage tank. And now that pressure plane has no elevated storage, but we're gonna pipe in, we're gonna put tanks, we're gonna do this, but that pressure plane won't have elevated storage. We've issued ACRs or exceptions for that to allow you to not have elevated storage between the time that you're decommissioning the tank and then installing a new one. So those will usually have expiration dates as well. But they usually don't expire. It will be up to the region to determine if you've grown, your usage is completely different, or maybe you changed from a non-community to a community. So this is when they might have, ask you to revise your ACR.